Dr. Judy Regensteiner is going to talk to us today about identifying funding. She's the director of the Ludeman Family Center for Women's Health Research and professor of medicine in the Division of Internal Medicine and Cardiology at the University of Colorado. She holds the Judith and Joseph Wagner Chair in Women's Health Research. And her research expertise is mainly in the cardiovascular effects of diabetes, with a specific focus on women with type 2 diabetes, since they appear to have more significant abnormalities than men with diabetes. She's also known for her research on peripheral artery disease. And her lab has been funded for over 25 years, and her more than 160 publications have greatly influenced the field. So I'm very excited to hear from her today.
Thank you. I had a slide, sort of a.
Yes, I don't know. Perfect.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. There's just one slide. If you can go to the third slide, I'll stay there.
Oh, and you know what? Just as a reminder, I think everyone heard this in the last session, but I know people are going to have questions. And if you could either type your questions into the chat box, I'll keep an eye on it. Or if you could raise your hand if you want to ask the question, live, that'd be great. Thanks.
Although I may or may not see you. Thanks for the very nice introduction, Brittany, and thank you for the ADA for inviting me to participate in this. I love working with fellows, and I've learned a lot about identifying funding, and I would welcome your questions. So please go ahead and ask, maybe put them in the chat so I can see it, and then we can talk. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. So the first thing I think about for fellows is the topic of internal grants. And you've probably thought about this, and maybe some of you have gotten internal grants. The CTSAs typically have funding for internal grants. Centers like the one I direct in women's health, we have grants every year. And there are numerous grants for early career investigators. I think it's when you get more senior that it actually gets a little harder. But there are a lot of pilot funds. Sometimes a really good source that people don't think about is the library. You can go to your librarians, love to help you find resources. And I get an email now about grants that might be in my field. And I just get it, and I can ignore it, or I can go after grants. And typically the grants I really want, I know about before that. But librarians are really good sources of information, not too surprisingly. So that's a kind of a secret one. Most people don't do that. And if you do that, it can really be helpful to you. So look for the small grants that are available in your area of interest. And, fellows should help each other if they see a nice grant that maybe they recommend it to their colleagues. And, we see that a lot. And then also ask the librarian, don't just, assume there are no grants for you. My first grant was a pilot grant, and I was thrilled. It was $14,000, and I thought it was the best thing in the world. So those grants get you started. Not only that, but a center grant like the Center for Women's Health Research, the Ludeman Center, which I again direct, we give out $25,000 grants, like 7 of them every year. And they are peer reviewed, and they're rigorously, people are chosen, who have very good credentials. But I've seen people turn those small grants around into very big grants, like R01s. I've seen $25,000, get a piece of data, fund a piece of data acquisition, and turn into a $3 million R1. So don't think those small grants are too small. And not only that, but a lot of times people won't go for a grant that they think, oh, $25,000, what's that? But it can pay half of a PRA, and most of half of a PRA, probably, a research assistant. It can pay for a lot of resources. And it looks good on your resume. It looks good on your CV to have that you've gotten grants. And I think most people do start with a smaller grant and then move up as they get more successful. But don't scoff at a smaller grant, because sometimes it can make a big, big difference. And I've seen it many, many times with early career faculty and fellows. So those are kind of traditional sources. Another internal source at your institution, which you probably or may not have thought of, but which I do a lot of, is working with your advancement office. And that is very local. So some people's advancement offices are extremely helpful and want to meet with young people and help get them funded through philanthropy. And some are a little harder to get interested in that. But if you have a good advancement office, they should want to start working with you as a young up and comer who's going to do great things. And a lot of times they might know. And I've had this happen where a young person, I made a match with them and a philanthropist through my advancement office, because the philanthropist was looking for somebody to fund who did the kind of work that they were interested in. I mean, this is big. My center recently got named the Ludeman Center because of a donor who gave us, a very, very large sum of money. But I've had, get money given to the center from very small amounts to very large amounts. The secret is to work with your advancement office, unless you have some direct source to the public, which most people do not. And if your advancement office will help you, philanthropy is not something people think of. And, if it's not a good mechanism for you to work with your advancement office, then it isn't. But if it is, they can really help promote you to funders, directly promote you to people who are interested in the work you do, who may have a passion for the work you do. When you're working with a donor, with a philanthropic donor, your work has to be really exciting to them. It's not about you, it's more about them meeting their needs. But so you have to be careful that you don't want to go off on a tangent. You want to do the work you want to do. And yet, if your work is exciting to a donor, it can be very lucrative. I mean, I myself helped build the endowed chair that I hold, and I'm very proud of that chair. And it didn't start when I was a fellow, I can tell you that much. But, things build, and now I have a chair. And that is where chairs come from donors. I'm interested, does anyone currently work with their advanced?
Recording in progress.
Anyone want to put it in the chat? I can't see you all because of the screen I'm sharing, but I am curious about, do people work with donors at all? And you can just...
I haven't personally. My division chief is really good at it. So I'm assuming he does work with the advancement office, because he's gotten a few fellowship spots funded through donors. And so he's very, very good at it, but it's something I'm interested in learning over the next couple of years, and really how to do that. Yeah.
Put you ahead of the game. I have 2 fellowship spots, which I'm going to be offering soon, funded by donors right now. And I'm pretty excited about it. And we'll use those because I love getting young people started, but it does take money. A more typical mechanism would be the externally funded T32 is often the postdoc T32 from NIH. And do some people have that now?
Yeah, we have had more success, I would say, with PhD type, people, but we've recently had some success with getting MDs, T32s. So it's starting to. Yeah.
And I see one person, Maria Salguero, Dr. Salguero, you have a T32? You're muted. Sorry. Is everyone?
Yes, I'm going to be on a T32, yes.
Congratulations. That's a great start. And the fellowships that I have to offer will be equivalent financially to a T32 postdoc. And so one thing you can do is ask your grants and contracts to acquaint you with the T32s that are at your institution. If you already have one, great. And you are in endocrinology, so presumably the division of endocrinology might be where you seek your funding. But we have some young scientists, MDs and PhDs who are funded by cardiology. If they do work in the cardiovascular consequences, for instance, of type 2 diabetes, you might have somebody in many divisions. And I know that Dr. Tomerdahl has K funding, right, Kaylee? Poor Kaylee. Always nice to be picked up when somebody knows your name. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's I was on the T32 during my fellowship as a pediatric endocrinology fellow, and then I switched to an adult nephrology T32 for an additional year, and now I'm going to go to a K.
Yay.
Yay.
Yep. That's a typical pathway from the T to the K. And there's not just the K23, like a lot of you may have heard of, which is an individual K grant. There is also the K-12, which is an institutional K grant. And we have a Birch grant, which is an institutional K-12. Many of your institutions will also have K-12s. And again, your grants and contracts office will know which ones are there. So we have a pediatric endocrinology K-12. We have the women's health K-12 that I direct, and there are numbers of them. But knowing what resources are already at your institution can help you. So T32 is institutional. Your institution may have several. And so you'd look and see, you could ask grants and contracts, or your Office of Grants and Contracts, where are the T32s? And then you could pursue them. And then you could find out about K-12s, which again are institutional. Typically, you always have to apply for them through a peer review process. But if you get one, then you're set. And then a lot of people, their next step is to a K-23, a K-08, or a K-01. Can you tell I spent too much time looking for funding for young people? Yeah, but I love it.
So that's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm doing a KL2, which I think is very similar to a K-12. And then I also have recently applied for a K-23. So yes.
Perfect. And then often the next step is an R. And sometimes people try to get you to skip the K step. Don't be fooled. The K pays most of your salary, a very big chunk of your salary. An R1 pays maybe 30 to 40%, at most 50%. So don't let people help tell you you're all ready and you should bypass the K process. The K gives you a lot of resource and supports your salary for a longer time so that you're able to pursue the work you want to do. So Ks have a very valuable role. And again, ask your institution, what K-12s or KL2s do you have on campus? They're already there, so just ask. And then T32s also, and most of you may be at the T32 level as a fellow. And then when you go to faculty, it's a K award. But your institution has these resources, so see what's there. It's pretty interesting how often people don't search out these things and they think there's nothing for them to get. So that's the K-12. And trying to see who's here. Hello, everybody. And I think there's a lot of sources of funding. I really think that it's easier at your level to find funding than it is as you get more senior. That's something to be aware of. As an associate professor, the resources are dwindling. And that's why we recently decided at my institution that we need to pay more attention to associate professors, because it's pretty important not to lose that pipeline.
Yeah, how long are you considered an early stage investigator? I can't remember.
So you're for NIH?
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure. Is it 5 years?
5 to 7, somewhere 5 to 7, I think, years out of training. I'm not sure. So, yeah.
So you want to apply for your R before you lose that privilege, because when you are an early career investigator, early stage investigator, you can easily see how long it is. Just go on the NIH and look it up. Their website, actually saying it's easy is a lie. Their website is really, really difficult to follow, but it's there. You could find it.
It looks like someone asked if there are options for non-US citizens who are not eligible for a T32.
There's the K99 ROO, I think is the name of the mechanism. And Tom, you can comment as well, but that grant is eligible. People who are not US citizens, I believe, can apply for that. There are not as many. Your local seed grants probably you can apply for, but NIH is, somewhat restrictive if you're not a green card holder.
And I think Dr. Baranski had said an early stage investigator is a new investigator who completed his or her terminal research degree or medical residency, whichever is later, which is nice because I've been in training for forever and fellowship and such, within the past 10 years and has not yet competed successfully for a substantial competing NIH research grant.
Thank you, Tom. So there are a lot of rules with NIH, but they do have some really good funding. And the institutional way that I told you about earlier, the K-12 or the KL2 versus the individual Ks are a good way to go. And the T32 is institutional as well. There is an additional year for the T32 called the F32, which is an individual fellow grant. And you can apply for that if you want a third year, but that's all you're allowed. No more than that is allowed to you. You're allowed up to 3 years on the T or the F. And then it's on to faculty funding, hopefully. And so while NIH funding is the gold standard, I would say, for all of us, getting some other mechanisms behind you is a good idea, which is where philanthropy can come in. And that's, I'll look at that comment in a minute. I'm still of old enough technology that I'm looking at chats and trying to talk, and it's not working. I'll stop trying to do it. But it's, and typically, hopefully your mentor will know some of this as well. They may not know the philanthropy piece. That's something I came to a little later in my career, but which, I wish I had known about earlier, which is why I'm telling you. It can, that's the most surprising thing I'm going to say to you today, is that you can look for philanthropy. And sometimes, that can be very effective. You shouldn't spend your whole life seeking out donors. I mean, somebody's got to help you with that, unless you personally are a wealthy individual who wants to endow your work, but which is always nice, but it's unlikely. So you need to focus on your work and NIH funding, but you also can supplement that or even have much bigger amounts from donors.
We got a good question in the chat that I think a lot of people have generally, because everyone gets rejected for a grant at some point. But this question is, what should you do if you apply for a grant or funding opportunity and it is rejected?
If you apply for a grant and it is rejected?
Yeah.
That's not an if, that's a definite.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you're a researcher and you're seeking grants, you will encounter rejection. And I don't know anybody, no matter how successful, who hasn't encountered some. And it's very painful. I will tell you, even now, and I've had lots of grants and I'm not even worried about it, it's still very painful. It's kind of crushing to not get funded or to get a manuscript rejected too, quite honestly. So if you get an NIH grant rejected, you can resubmit it one time. And you are well instructed to, at that time, contact your program officer at NIH. You'll be assigned one when your grant's reviewed, and you would contact that person. That won't happen with a T32 or a K12, an institutional grant, because the person who's the head of that grant is the person who wrote the big grant for the institution. But when you write your first individual grant, say you write a K23, which is an individual K, and you get, maybe you get scored. You can get scored, you might not get scored, and you can get funded or not get funded. So the top half of grants get scores, and it can be more liberal with a K grant. There's more flexibility. I've known people that wrote a grant and a year later it got funded because they came up some miraculously with more money. So, but you cannot count on that happening. Absolutely. But you, when you write a grant, say you get it back, it gets scored, but it doesn't get funded. The score isn't good enough. And the scores start at 10. The best score is a 10. And the higher the score, like a 23 is worse than a 10. 23 is actually a great score. 50 definitely won't be fundable in most of NIH, but it's still a score. And that's a good thing. Getting a score is good. That means your grant was thought to be in the top half of grants. So that's a plus. And then you find out it's not going to get funded, which is sad, but happens a lot. And then you can rewrite it. But before you do that, you're going to get comments back from 2 to 3 reviewers, usually 3. And if you can respond to those comments adequately, the next time you put your grant in, you're allowed 1 page of rebuttal or response to reviewers. And then you can put the grant back in with that response. It's a responsive, or it's not a renewal, it's a responsive grant, a grant that is resubmission. Thank you. I was blanking on the word. And it can get evaluated again and is much more likely to get funded if you've responded. So the secret thing that people don't do is call their program officer and have a discussion. And sometimes that would be good to do with your mentor, because your mentor may help guide the discussion a little bit and make sure you get all the juice out of that discussion to make sure that you are able to optimally respond. And then when you write your response with your rebuttal, you have a good chance of getting funded, but you only get one chance. And after that, you have to come up with a new idea or reconnect your grant in different ways. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. The rejection is hard, but get used to it because our career is one of rejection, and that makes the acceptances all the sweeter. I don't know a single person who's gotten every grant they've written. So you're in good company.
Yeah. I think that's a good message, just to keep applying, because some people might get discouraged by, their first grant gets rejected and they're like, oh, well, it got rejected. I'm not cut out for this or whatever. And then they just need to know that they just need to keep going at it. So it's good.
Yeah, it's persistence. In this career, persistence may be even more important than talent. You might be a great grant writer, but if you're not persistent, you're not going to make it. So you have to be persistent, resilient, cheerful, and lots of other qualities. And you're not going to be cheerful when you get a grant rejected because you care. But then you go back in, you get funded, and there can't be a better moment than when you get a grant funded. It's exciting. It's fun. So those are my ideas. I think they're about to end our workshop. So I just want to tell you, there are more ways than you might think about how to get funded, and you need to go after them. There is money there, and you are the target audience for that money. Fellows and early career faculty. So be persistent, dig in, go to the library, write grants, look for pilots, you'll get funded. And listen to people. If they tell you something idea needs further work, listen to people. Take advice cheerfully.